Hello everyone, it's me and INFP. Welcome back. Enjoy this smile while you can because something's coming. Today I want to talk to you about something that's actually related to my senior presentation for college. Something called attachment styles. If you are not familiar with attachment styles, you're going to get familiar. So, attachment styles are something that everyone forms in childhood, typically around 2 years old. Attachment style is basically early childhood experiences with your caregivers, like parents or someone close to you, that end up forming the internal working models that form your view of future relationships and perceptions of the world. So that's a big thing. Attachment styles affect people's behavior in relationships more than they ever realize. And I strongly believe this. A lot of the issues that people have in relationships, not just even in romantic, but even in things such as like friendships, are caused by attachment styles. And people may not even be aware that they have an attachment style or that their attachment style is influencing their behavior and their perceptions towards other people. So I mentioned an internal working model. So that was coined by John Bowlby, which was the first attachment theorist. I have to talk a little bit about theorists because if you're a psychology major, you hear about psychology theorists a lot. So an internal working model of relationships is basically like forming your beliefs and your perceptions about yourself and about other people, and the dynamic between you two is how that's going to work. Like an example of like an internal working model would be like, a positive one would be like, I am lovable and I can trust other people. That would be a healthy internal working model. So with attachment styles, there are 4. One of them is secure. And this is like the typical, I would say, healthy attachment style. This individual grew up probably in a healthy environment with loving, supportive parents who made them feel safe and developed a secure base that they knew they could go to if they were in distress, but they also let them feel independent enough to be able to go explore things on their own. So they have a nice balance. And what that leads to in relationships is they tend to have a positive view of themselves and a positive view of other people, which makes them have more confidence and trust when it comes to forming relationships. They're comfortable both being close with others and giving others space and themselves taking space. Supposedly, 50% roughly of the population is secure. Although the stats, honestly, I would like them to be reevaluated because I see like a lot of insecure people. So the other 3 attachment styles are insecure attachment styles. And these formed by experiences they had probably when they were young, around 2 years old. And that's something that they didn't choose their attachment style, or like they didn't realize what their behavior or other people's behavior was doing. Like most of you probably don't even remember when you were 2 years old what happened. But things that happen at that age can still deeply affect us, even if we don't consciously remember it. So insecure attachment styles typically stem from caregivers or people we trusted to take care of us being either like neglectful, smothering, abusive, those type of things. And it doesn't even have to be something that severe. It could even be something like one of the parents maybe had a mental illness like depression, or maybe someone was like a younger child from a large family and they felt ignored or invisible compared to their other siblings, and that led to an insecure internal model. Like, just all these different dynamics can happen. Or maybe like the family environment was chaotic and like a lot of drama went on. Or it could even be like a major loss, like a death happened like around when they were 2 years old, and that caused like some kind of trauma and, development of an insecure internal working model. So 3 insecure attachment styles, 1 secure attachment style. So you're basically either secure or insecure. Of the 3 attachment styles, the one that's said to be a little more prevalent in the world is the avoidance. There are actually 2 avoidants: the dismissive avoidant and the fearful avoidant. So the dismissive avoidant, as you can tell by the name, is typically a distant type of individual, and they may not come off like that at first. They may be very like charming, they may come off as like friendly, but they're distant emotionally, and usually when you get really close to them, it starts to show up. So dismissive avoidants tend to have a high view of themselves, a positive view of themselves, and a negative view of others. They feel uncomfortable getting close to other people, depending on other people. Their mindset is that one of their fears is becoming enmeshed in a way, becoming like having their freedom and their independence taken away from them. They like a lot of space. While they have a positive view of themselves consciously, it's kind of the same as like narcissists who like they think they have a high view of themselves, but actually deep inside they suffer from a sense of like shame and low self-esteem. They may not even be conscious of that, but they do. As basically all the insecure attachment styles do. So I'm actually going to explain the fearful avoidant last because it will make sense. There's the secure, the dismissive avoidant, which is supposedly around 25% of the population. And then there's the anxious preoccupied. They tend to be the opposite of dismissive avoidance. They tend to have a negative view of themselves, but a positive view of other people. And they tend to seek proximity and closeness from other people because one of their core fears is abandonment, and they constantly desire to be closer, and if people pull away, then that just kind of triggers their fear and makes them even want to push closer. These are the type of people who will blow up your inbox and text you like 1,000 messages in one day. And dismissive avoidants are the type of people who might text like really short answers or just kind of like ignore you for a week, not say they love you and stuff like that. Fearful avoidants are kind of a combination of the 2. They have the 2's fears combined. They fear getting too close to people, but they also desire to get close to people. And this tends to be a turbulent attachment style because they have conflictive wants that are, clashing against each other. And sometimes one wins out and then sometimes the other wins out. And they tend to have a negative view of themselves and other people. And what I mean by this is that negative meaning that they think people can't be trusted. They think people are going to hurt them. They're afraid like people aren't safe, like that type of thing. And then when it comes to themselves, they typically have like low self-esteem, and they're also hard on themselves because dismissive avoidants don't consciously have that. They tend to be able to, I would say, like cut off connections easier because they tend to suppress their emotions. Whereas anxious, preoccupied, and fearful avoidants have a hard time handling their emotions, and they're not very good at suppressing them. Although I will say the fearful avoidant can have like a switch where they might be in an anxious mode, like seeking people, being like, so they won't be abandoned, but then like something might happen that makes them flip that switch, and then they become a little more dismissive, and they might kind of pull away from people and just kind of withdraw. So why is this important for your guys' lives? Like, I believe that having knowledge of what your attachment style is very powerful. It explains a lot of your behavior, why you do the things the way you do in regards to your relationships with other people, but also it explains some of your triggers that like you didn't even realize that were stemming from this. There's things called like core beliefs, and that stems from like the internal working model that we formed when we were young children. And we tend to believe those same things as we grow up and become adults, and that affects our adult relationships. Core beliefs can be positive or negative. If they're negative, that's what forms an insecure attachment. If they're positive, that's what forms a secure attachment. So like a negative core belief would be like, I'm unlovable. A secure belief would be like, I am lovable. And like, I'm sure you get the idea. So yes, while knowing about your attachment style is powerful, what's even more powerful is actually taking the steps to heal yourself if you're an insecure attachment style. Anxious preoccupieds are about 20% of the population, and fearful avoidants are actually the least common. They're about 5% of the population. An interesting fact is that avoidants tend to be prevalent in the dating pool as the age goes up. So like as all the secure people get taken because they don't have a problem being intimate in relationships, and they're not too smothering or too distant, so they tend to get paired off early. And as ages go on, like you get into your 30s and 40s, the number of avoidance, especially like dismissive avoidance, tends to be higher. So that's something you want to watch out for, unfortunately. Like if you're dating as an older adult, there tend to be more avoidants who are still single because they struggle maintaining relationships. Now, if you are an avoidant, I mean, you're just one of a secure attachment style. There's nothing wrong with that. You likely don't even know that you're an avoidant. Dismissive avoidants especially tend not to want to work on themselves. And even if they do know that they're an avoidant, they tend to not like want to heal. Fearful avoidants want relationships more. That's the difference between them and dismissive avoidance. Dismissive avoidants kind of feel like they don't need relationships, but they still end up in them anyway because they do subconsciously have needs, but they deny them. And they want to feel like they can get along without anybody. They're not dependent on anyone. They can take or leave relationships. Whereas fearful avoidants deeply want relationships. But then when they get it, they sabotage it and push it away because of this turbulence inside them that's like they're fighting like opposite wants. So they tend to want relationships, but they have trouble getting into one and then maintaining it without self-sabotaging. Dismissive avoidants might more easily get into relationships, but they may not be emotionally present in that relationship. Anxious preoccupieds tend to get into relationships more easily because they're eager for love and connection and intimacy, and that's kind of like their hunger, and they will jump into relationships, but it may not always last. I mean, I don't know what the prevalency is for them in the older dating pools. I've heard it's avoidance, not anxious preoccupieds. So it could just be they're just eager to find someone who will like last with them. What's interesting is that there's something called the anxious-avoidant trap, which is avoidance, especially dismissive avoidance, and anxious preoccupieds being drawn to each other, which is an awful idea because they're the total opposites. They have totally opposite needs, and they trigger each other's need. Like, they trigger each other's fears. Like, dismissive avoidance, fear being enmeshed, engulfed, and anxious preoccupieds, fear being abandoned or not loved, and they kind of fulfill each other's fears, and they end up being attracted to each other. Because subconsciously, they're kind of drawn to people who will kind of do what their fears dictate. Like, if you know what I mean, like, it's kind of the same idea how we're kind of reliving our attachments to other people in our past, like our caregivers, and trying to reenact that relationship if it didn't go well, and being attracted to the same traits in other people. Like if you had a dad who was dismissive avoidant and he was distant, and maybe he was kind of cold and didn't like emotionally engage with you, and then you find yourself attracted to dismissive avoidant guys, and you tend to try to win them over because subconsciously you wanted your father's love. This is getting a little like Freudian here, but yeah, you wanted to have like the love of your father that you weren't able to get, so you're attracted to the same traits in other people because you're still trying to fix that relationship, and you're thinking, if I can win them over, if I can make them love me, then that will prove that I'm worthy or the relationship is fixed, like kind of like that. And that's why people tend to be drawn to the same type of people, even if they were abusive, like abusive parents or abusive exes. And then people tend to be drawn to people in the future who are also abusive because they're still reenacting that story and trying to have the happy ending that they want. But they're not going to, because like that dynamic isn't healthy. Those people aren't healthy, and it's never going to work out the way they want. So that's kind of like the same thing with attachment styles of like dismissive avoidance and anxious preoccupieds being drawn to each other, because in a way like they're kind of fulfilling the fears of their stories. It tends to get very toxic eventually. Yeah, so it's like anxious preoccupieds might find themselves attracted to people who seem distant or mysterious in some way, and it turns out it's because they were avoidant. And like, that's not a good thing, to be attracted to someone because of their insecure attachment style, which it happens, obviously. Now, when it comes to fearful avoidance, there tend to be anxious leaning ones or dismissive leaning ones. They're still fearful avoidant, but sometimes they lean a little more one way or the other. And depending which way they're leaning, they tend to be attracted to the opposite of that. Just like with the anxious preoccupied and dismissive avoidant. So if a fearful avoidant is more anxious leaning, they tend to be drawn to dismissive avoidance. If they're more dismissive leaning, they might be attracted to anxious preoccupieds. Or they just might be attracted to other fearful avoidants. It's kind of crazy how stuff like that happens. But once you learn, like, there's something called an earned secure, which means it is possible. Good news, it's possible to change your insecure attachment style. It will take work, and healing and time, but it is possible to go from an insecure attachment style to a secure attachment style. Typically, it takes a few years, depending on how hard you're working at it, how much progress you're making, and the type of relationships you're in, because they also say that insecure attachments, being in a relationship with a secure person, can also help them become a little more secure themselves. Because insecure attachments, getting into relationships with other insecure attachments, is just going to trigger everyone, and it's not going to lead to healing. So I hope you learned a little bit more about attachment styles from this. Maybe you learned which attachment style you are: secure, dismissive, avoidant, anxious, preoccupied, fearful, avoidant. I didn't want to make this too long, but I kind of got off on a ramble. So I will end it here. I might talk more about attachment styles in the future. If you enjoy this video, please like it or comment. Tell me what your attachment style is, or your experiences with relationships and your internal working model. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and have a lovely day or evening.